Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode in our Building Better Boards and Leaders podcast, where we examine the key issues facing boards and executive leaders. I'm Susie Leese, Corporate and Commercial Partner and co-lead of our Beyond Compliance initiative and co-host of this podcast. Whether we like it or not, generative AI is changing the way we work and will increasingly continue to do so. But it's one thing to use generative AI and another to use it responsibly, legally, and ethically. So how do we go about doing this? Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two guests to help discuss this issue. My first guest is Lisa Ziegert, who is the Director of Client Solutions here at Hall & Wilcox. Lisa is a legal operations specialist whose team delivers technology solutions as part of our Smarter Law strategy. Our second guest is Katie Scott, who is a seasoned professional with over 2 decades of experience in the IT industry, currently serving as an Azure Technology Sales Manager for Microsoft. Before joining Microsoft, Katie held significant roles for 15 years at Empire Limited and OBS, and her last role was National Business Manager, Portals and Productivity, during which she led one of Microsoft's most significant partner organisations in Australia, overseeing the leadership, growth and performance of the business nationally. In addition to her professional achievements, Katie has also served as a judge for the iAwards from 2013 to 2022, which is Australia's premier technology awards program that recognises achievements and innovation in ICT across all facets of the economy. Welcome, Katie and Lisa.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Let's begin by talking about the impact that generative AI is having on businesses since it emerged and the way that work and technology is evolving. Katie, let's start with what generative AI actually is and how it's different to existing technology.
Sure. So generative AI is defined as a category of artificial intelligence capabilities that creates original content. And that can include things like text or language. It can write computer code. It can generate new images and videos, music, and even more. So to compare generative AI with existing technology, traditional AI systems are primarily used for tasks like data analysis and making predictions based on that data. And a lot of organisations, especially finance and banking, have been using this for a really long time. Now, in contrast, generative AI can create new and realistic artefacts that reflect characteristics of the training data that was used, offering innovative applications across all industries. So what sets generative AI apart from existing technologies is its ability to not just analyse and interpret data, but to use that data as a springboard for creation. Traditional AI might help us make decisions by providing insights based on existing information, but generative AI takes us a step further, producing novel outputs that can inspire new ideas, drive innovation, and even disrupt industries. So for leaders and executives who are listening to your podcast, the implications are huge. And generative AI can accelerate research and development, personalize their customers' experiences at scale, and solve complex problems. It's not just an evolution of technology, it's a tool that can really redefine the landscape of business strategy and competitive advantage.
That's so interesting, Katie, when you think about the creativity and the innovation aspects and how that can apply in a business context. As you say, the fact that it comes up with novel outputs is really quite incredible and quite a game changer. Lisa, you've just come back from a conference on AI and professional services. How is generative AI already changing the way we work?
Well, generative AI is already capable of a broad range of tasks, things like text summarization, document drafting and review, sentiment analysis, and translation. So there's been a lot of experimentation around using AI for these types of tasks and talk about how this can really improve productivity. There were also examples about how AI is being used daily, delivering some real time savings, things like reducing admin for general efficiencies. So for the legal industry, there's also a lot of excitement around the use of generative AI for legal specific tasks with tools that can deliver efficiency gains for tasks like legal research.
And Katie, this is technology that is rapidly developing. We just saw the latest version of ChatGPT be released. How do you see AI evolving and being used by businesses in the near future? Have you got some examples that you can share with us in terms of problems Microsoft is using AI to solve for business clients?
Absolutely, Susie. This isn't something in the future. This is happening now. So it's very exciting. And I think for your audience, if you can, I know that using AI is very, very broad, but you can think of it in 4 kind of categories. Summarizing information, like Lisa had mentioned, content generation, data analysis, and simplifying processes. So I have some examples to share from some of Microsoft's customers using AI. The first comes from Telstra. It's about summarizing information. And they built a tool called One Sentence Summary, which transforms recent customer notes from the databases, the interactions and transactions, into a concise summary of a customer's recent history and status. 90% of the Telstra employees using this tool saved time and increased effectiveness, resulting in 20% less follow-up contact with customers. Okay, the second example is of content generation. And this is where a law firm working with a Microsoft partner, including their own lawyers specializing in environmental and planning law, worked to create an advice generator, which is a tool to help draft and revise legal advice. And it comes with complete with citations and reference documents, so you can check this. And junior lawyers can also learn how the tool works through the thought process feature, which shows exactly how the prompt draws most relevant data from the draft advice. It feels like it's reverse machine learning, where the machines teach us. So what usually takes a couple of hours involving junior lawyers now takes under 30 seconds.
That could potentially be a game changer as well for lawyers who, would like to do more training and mentoring and can get some of that time back as well, which is quite extraordinary.
It is, definitely. So the third example I have revolves data analysis. And I know we've talked about this as being an example of traditional AI, but this one uses generative AI and data analysis in partnership with Liverpool Hospital. And Liverpool Hospital is one of the largest teaching hospitals in Sydney. And it was to develop a generative AI solution to assist cardiologists in surveying huge amounts of cardiology-related literature and guidelines that come out every year to aid in decision-making in clinical practice. So this field has an exponentially growing knowledge base, and it really does present a challenge to these cardiologists and specialists to keep up to date with available evidence. So to address this, Liverpool Hospital Microsoft explored the potential of using generative AI to create a prototype that allows clinicians to interact with and query a huge body of literature in the field of cardiology. So they called it Cardiology Canon. And it was programmed on clinical trials from the last 40 years, guidelines from eminent cardiac societies in Australia, Europe, and the United States. This is more than 500 individual documents and 80,000 pages to create this solution, which is accessible as a web application. And so the result means cardiologists and anyone training in this field can query vast amounts of literature to answer clinical questions or make nuanced comparisons across this significant body of literature that they have. And the solution had a dual effect. It also successfully created in 6 days a comprehensive training program on aortic stenosis, a common clinical program among patients, and generated comprehensive learning resources in hours rather than days. And I've seen this work in firsthand, where it comes up with like 4 personas to help a junior doctor learn. The first persona is a patient who has real symptoms, and you can ask them questions about, how they're feeling as the doctor. And the second one is a doctor mentor, where if you get stuck, trying to diagnose the patient, the mentor can prompt you. There's another persona that helps run tests that you can order and get results back. And so not only guides the doctor through learning the diagnosis procedures, but it also gives them tips on empathy, because it evaluates through their language and the things they're using, how a doctor might be interacting with a patient, and are they showing empathy? So that was really exciting.
That's
There's
really
lots of-
extraordinary,
yeah.
isn't it, from a health context and a training
Totally.
perspective as well as the efficiencies. I mean, that's, as you say, it's a real game changer.
Absolutely. The training applications across all industries is very exciting. And this concept of creating a subject matter expert through AI, like an expert in cardiology. We've also done examples where we created experts in chemistry and advanced computational chemistry to create a battery that uses 70% less lithium as a result of training it in chemistry. The final example I have, the fourth example, has to do with simplifying processes. And this comes from a bank who is using AI to read, analyze, and process customer documentation more quickly and accurately than us humans can. So this is enabling the bank to half the time it takes to verify someone's income when it processes a loan, for instance. There's lots of great financial services examples, including invoice automation, which is one of my favorite ones, because I remember projects around invoice automation used to cost a fortune and take a really long time. But now with AI, these projects can take a significantly less amount of resources.
There's so much in that, isn't there, from a efficiency and teaching and training and process driven perspective. And I think about a lot of our business clients who, from an innovation perspective and also just getting some time back so they can drive more revenue and cost savings in their business is an incredible outcome of this technology. So Lisa, despite the number of clear benefits that Katie's just outlined, there's obviously on the flip side of that a number of risks associated with the use of AI that companies need to consider that are different to traditional software. From your perspective, what are the key risks of using generative AI?
Well, as Katie's already mentioned, when she covered how generative AI is different to existing technology, it creates new content. So from a technical perspective, the potential limitations with the use of generative AI are things like information and data security concerns. So far as in the inputs that are being shared, potentially being used to train the AI model. There's a need to use secure systems so that proprietary information can be used. Also, accuracy is a concern. It's well known that generative AI can hallucinate by generating incoherent or fabricated responses, not necessarily factual responses, and the response may appear to have been provided with some certainty. So these are limitations that can be minimised by ensuring sufficient guardrails and grounding techniques that are applied. There's also concerns around the way that generative AI creates new content based from its large data set, that it might reproduce some of the same content from information that's been trained on. It generally appears uncommon that generative AI would take large sections of text or content from one specific source when it creates new content, but there definitely are concerns around that. And also, as for any AI, potential for discrimination or bias in output, and it could be in the data that's been trained on. And lastly, there's also the possibility of improper use or potential to be used for malicious purposes. Susie, you might like to cover these risks from a legal perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. It's such an interesting topic, and we're certainly, from a corporate governance perspective in my practice, working with a lot of companies and boards who are getting their heads around these risks. And you touched on a few, and once you start to sort of think about how this technology works, you can see where the legal risks arise, whether it's staff putting confidential information and sensitive proprietary information into AI platforms that then can potentially be shared. I think early on, Samsung had some code shared by some engineers who were checking their homework, so to speak. And, those are obvious security and confidentiality risks that all businesses have to manage in terms of either locking down their systems or having some policies and frameworks and guardrails in place, as you say. And you mentioned as well that ability to take potentially chunks of text. So whether there's copyright issues, where does the data come from that it's producing? Is it genuinely novel, or is it actually a bit of a rip-off or a copyright breach in some cases, depending on what it's been trained on? I think also the risks you mentioned around bias, and I always think about generative AI in terms of data in and data out, and what do you put into it, but also what do you do with the output that comes back. And if you think of it like a really good first draft, but then something that somebody has to check and vet, and that human element of decision making as a result of the AI output. Obviously, it's incredible and it drives efficiencies, and it can in some uses be more accurate than a human, but there's got to be some element of checking and avoiding that issue of automated decision making, and the recognition as well. I think that when you talk about the bias, if it's finding the most likely like pattern, so to speak, or stereotype, that it's not ending up with bias and stereotypes, like we've seen a few cases of in the US, where algorithms have been used and AI has been used in certain applied ways, which have treated genders differently or races differently, or based it on historical data, not perhaps the way things should be. So there's certainly some parameters that need to be in place, I think, when we're thinking about this from a risk and a board perspective. So moving on from the risk perspective, and I know there's a lot of talk around ethical use of AI. Katie, how do you think that we can balance those risks to ensure the responsible and ethical use of AI? I mean, there's so much to be gained from this innovative technology. We want to be driving that as well as managing those risks.
Absolutely. For AI to benefit everyone, it has to be developed and used in ways which warrant everyone's trust. And balancing those risks to ensure the responsible and ethical use involves a multifaceted approach. So our approach at Microsoft to responsible AI is based on 6 principles, which both you, Susie and Lisa, touched on there, but I'm just going to summarise them for clarity. So the first principle is around transparency. AI systems need to be transparent in their operations. So we need to be able to understand how decisions are made. And that includes clear documentation and the ability to audit those processes. The second is accountability. There should be clear lines of accountability for AI decisions, and organisations using AI need to be responsible for the outcomes of their AI systems. Fairness. AI should be designed to avoid bias, as you mentioned, Susie, and ensure fair treatment of all individuals. And so this involves regular testing for biases and taking corrective action if anything's found. And of course, it should be inclusive for accessibility. So we need to give consideration for how the system might be designed to be inclusive for people of all abilities. Then there's privacy, and AI systems must protect user privacy. Implementing data protection measures and ensuring that personal data is not misused is critical in this. And finally, safety and security. AI should be secure against tampering and misuse and should operate safely under all of those conditions. So those 6 principles are focused on proactively establishing the guardrails, Lisa, those guardrails that you spoke about for AI systems, so that we can make sure that their risks are anticipated and mitigated, and therefore we can maximise the benefits. So the building blocks that are the basis for our responsible AI program, Microsoft, include a governance structure to enable progress and accountability, rules to standardise our responsible AI requirements, training and practices to help our employees act, and think deeply about the socio-technical impacts of AI systems. And of course, the tools and processes for implementation. And Microsoft makes available the templates and guides for any organisation to implement their own responsible AI program.
That's fantastic, Katie. It's such a great framework. And Lisa, I know we talk a lot about this as well. From your perspective, practically, because we do love some good tips on this podcast, what can a company do to manage the risks associated with AI?
Well, we've touched on some of these already, but some things that companies can consider to manage these risks, things like having an AI policy to govern the use of any AI technology is a good start. It includes the permitted purpose, managing those inaccurate or incorrect responses, and also attributing the use of an AI tool so that other people know it's being used. Just generally with being aware which technology systems are using AI, monitoring the use of those systems, and whether any control mechanisms are needed. There's also the data information governance, which is really important when it comes to the use of AI tools, including who has access to what data. And then lastly, providing education to staff on AI and the appropriate use of tools, including how prompting works, is another way that's really helpful.
Fantastic. And Katie, you've said before that you can't imagine doing your job without AI now. Can you share some practical tips for our listeners in terms of how people can use AI in the workplace?
Absolutely. And it's true. I can't do my job without it now. I don't want to do my job without it
There's
now.
no going back.
No, it really does take away some of that grunt work that makes the jobs not fun, right? And then you can focus on the fun bits. So just some examples that I think can be applicable to a lot of different people in different roles is summarizing lengthy documents is one. So I get a lot of very long emails every week about global security IT news. So, and there's a lot of security hacks and things going on the world every day. So this is a long email. So I like to use it to summarize those long emails. Colleagues of mine use it to summarize and compare competitor earnings reports as well, which can be, really daunting task is to go through competitor earnings reports and then try and create some kind of analysis between them or comparison between them. The other way we do it is often in meetings. And of course, at Microsoft, we run a lot of Teams meetings. So Teams meetings is now infused with AI and can automatically create meeting notes and list of actions by owner. You can see where you were mentioned. So no longer does anyone have to attend long meetings just in case. You know how there's a lot of FOMO, I better attend the meeting. Now we can be more efficient and only attend those meetings where we're participating in and just get the summaries of those meetings that perhaps we didn't need to attend. One of the most powerful demos that we do is creating a PowerPoint based on an internal document. For example, an earnings document. You can use PowerPoint to say, create me a draft PowerPoint presentation using this document, and it does an amazing job. And every time we do that demo, it gets gasps from the audience on that one. Finally, an example that you can use if you don't have Microsoft Copilot, and I use this to accelerate my own learning. At the moment, I was studying part-time to do a master's in data science. And my current subject is statistical inference. Now,
that sounds fun.
It does. It very much helps with the AI. But there was a couple of questions, and I was trying to compare the differences between the answers. And one solution used Bayes' theorem in the answer, whereas the other question did not. And I wasn't sure why one question would have used the application of that theorem and the other didn't. So I used the generative AI that's available in bing.com. And so people who don't know what Bing is, it's the other Google, right? So you can go to bing.com and use the AI there, generative AI there. And so I input the two examples and asked AI, why did one use Bayes' theorem and the other did not? And for anyone who really cares on the call, one involved prior information, but it gave me the answer and it helped accelerate my learning very quickly about understand the differences in the application of the different theories. But so it's a huge, huge help in helping people learn. But it's not limited to, formal education degrees. So I do recommend if anyone hasn't yet used ChatGPT or any other generative AI tool before, you can jump onto bing.com using your email address. You don't need a credit card or anything. And it will give you some prompts that you can try and get started and just get a feel for how this works.
And the prompting's key, right? We often get a lot of questions around that in terms of how you do that. And I might ask an extra question if I can around prompting and if you have any tips on that.
Sure. So there's 4, I think, elements to kind of put into it. So for example, what is the goal? What response do you want from AI? So for example, you might say generate 3 to 5 bullet points. Might be the goal. The second thing is the context. You need to, it's like, why do you need it and who is involved? So the example there might be to prepare me for a meeting with this client to discuss their something campaign. The third item would be the source. Which information sources or samples can we direct AI to use? So an example could be focus on email and Teams chats since June. And finally, the expectations. Who should Copilot respond to best meet your expectations? And the example I can give is, please use simple language so I can get up to speed quickly. So I'm going to put all that together, the goal, the context, the source, and the expectations. And the result is generate 3 to 5 bullet points to prepare me for a meeting with client X to discuss their blah campaign. Focus on email and Teams chat since June, and please use simple language so I can get up to speed quickly.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you so much for that, Katie. And I also loved your presentation example as well. I'm totally going to steal that as well. And I'd also heard someone else from your Microsoft team once say that their favorite feature as well in the meeting context is that you can come in late to a meeting and get caught up. So you don't have to rehash, that's amazing.
Yeah. And if you know, sometimes you're in a long meeting and you can vague out very easily, or you miss something, you get distracted by an
We
incoming
would
email.
never do that at home.
Never.
For sure.
But you can interact with it and ask questions like, oh, what did Laura say in the last 10 minutes?
Yeah,
And it will summarize for you.
Yeah, great. Oh, amazing. We could go on all day. Look, that's all we have time for today. And thank you everyone for listening. I'm sure there are a lot of tips and takeaways in this episode. As always, please get in touch with us if you have any questions. You can find our details on our website, which is hallandwilcox.com.au, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you, Lisa and Katie, for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, then rate, review, or follow our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.